Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 27th of February 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studios, Mike Robinson. Mike, defence of the realm, something that Theresa May, of course, has been working hard on.
Well, indeed,
but not.
Well, particularly working hard to bring us closer and closer to the French. And we had the Franco-British summit a couple of weeks ago. Well, now they have announced the Royal Navy and Royal Marines joining a major French deployment. This is UK Maritime Forces taking part in the French naval deployment in the Indian Ocean and Far East. This is Jeanne d'Arc. Around 40 Royal Navy and Royal Marine personnel, 2 Wildcat helicopters joined the French Naval Task Force Jeanne d'Arc for a 5-month mission. The ship's port calls will include Jakarta, Bali, Darwin, Saigon and Singapore. And British personnel are going to take part in amphibious exercises and defence engagement. It's not a huge number of people involved in this, Brian, but as usual, it's developing ways of working together, developing procedures, dealing with the language issues.
Well, this is correct, and small groups embedded. This is really mostly about acclimatising these men and women to get used to the French operations. So we can see this is pulling us together with the French. But the other thing I think is happening is each one of these small deployments is blown up in the press as if this is major military action. And of course, the reality is that Britain's military forces being decimated. This is about amphibious operations you just mentioned, but of course we're selling off HMS Ocean for a pitiful 84 million. I think the total was just after a 60 million refit. So it's blown up in the press as if we're still involved with these things, but underneath everything is being cut away. So I think this is more propaganda and smokescreen.
Okay, well, the Bruges Group passed around an email this morning, and we've got to say well done to the Bruges Group for finally getting on board with this, because it's taken, about 2 years to persuade them to get involved with this issue of European Defence Union. Is that fair?
I think we could say longer than that, Mike. I think we could go back about 5 years, because the UK column has been on the tail of the Bruges Group for a very long time, talking about the European Union, what it really was, how it was going to do things. So maybe there's a glimmer of light here. They're waking up.
Yes, the email says EU defence and security plans include the UK even after Brexit. Take part in the Bruges Group campaign to ask your MP for a full Brexit for defence. Email your Member of Parliament to inform them about the government committing the UK to be part of the EU's defence and security plans. The EU is establishing what it calls an EU defence union. This includes the UK, and so they're asking people to email their MPs. Well, I encourage that, absolutely. Not necessarily as part of the Bruges Group campaign, but always a good idea to make sure your MPs understand where you stand on this issue. If you need some background information, there's plenty of it on the EU military unification page on the UK column website.
We can just add to that, of course, if you inform an MP by communicating with them in writing or by email and you get no response, then you're getting part of the answer that you wanted in the first place. So don't be put off. If you contact the MPs, they are immediately under pressure. And if you get a reply, that's good. If you don't get a reply, that's also good, because they're telling you what they are really about.
Now, Policy Exchange was holding an event yesterday, and according to Mark Rowley, who is the former Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, he says that the Met Police have foiled 4 extremist plots by right-wing groups in the UK last year. He was giving a speech at the Colin Cramphorn Memorial Lecture in London last night. He said that there are major concerns over potential attacks by anti-Islam groups in Britain. He compared the threat from Islamic extremists to far-right extremists. He said that although the far right proclaims to hate jihadists, it can be just as dangerous. He said the right-wing threat was not previously organised. Every now and then there's been an individual motivated by that rhetoric who has committed a terrorist act, but we've not had an organised right-wing threat like we do now. And he said that the power of individuals to drive recruitment in extremist organisations, for example, Anjar Chowdhury and Islamic State, on one hand, and groups such as National Action and Tommy Robinson, people like Tommy Robinson on the other. And he said that Islamic terrorists and far right are both trying to increase tensions and divisions in communities. Brian, I would have said that looking at the rhetoric from various people, it's really the media, the politicians and the police that are working to increase tensions more than anybody else at the moment.
Well, I would certainly agree with that, Mike. And of course, we've had police, former serving Met Police, saying that in their opinion, they believe that the whole of the PREVENT strategy was designed to increase hatred and was designed to help indoctrinate particularly young children in the schools. We are going to be able to follow up more on some of those reports coming through, but that is quite a statement that the government's policy to supposedly protect the nation is the policy which is helping to ramp up. And now we can see that, of course, on one side you bring in everything to do with Islam, the so-called Islamic State and the Muslims, and on the other side now we've got the police crowing that they foiled 4 right-wing extremist threats last year. So we haven't seen any evidence for this, and the only person they've been talking about is Tommy Robinson. But the inference is we've got things set up nicely for violence. Yes. We're pumping up one side, we're pumping up the other side. And what UK Colin will continue to say is that if we are foolish enough to fall into this trap of violence on the streets, then in will come the rest. In will come the curfews. In will come the invitation to European police to help police forces in this country stabilise the country. And the moment those EU police are brought in, they are not, of course, civilian police. They are militarily controlled. So this is very dangerous stuff. Well, the police, are they to be trusted? We would say in many respects no. And we thought today we'd like to give you an update on John Wedger, the very brave Metropolitan Police whistleblower. If you're not aware of this hour's interview, this was done by the UK column about a year ago now, Mike, I think, is that right? A bit longer, longer than that. An hour's interview with a former Metropolitan policeman, Detective Constable John Wedger, talking about the grooming, the cover-up of abuse, prostitution and deaths of children in London, and the terrible treatment that John Wedger had at the hands of the Metropolitan Police. Now, John Wedger has been walking from London to Manchester as a way of raising public interest in the child abuse and also raising public interest in the treatment of whistleblowers. And I can tell you that this morning, John was somewhere in the Rugby region. His route is following the canal system from London up to Manchester. This was an easy way of him being able to have safe walking group. It is 200 miles or over 200 miles with some of the zigzags in that route. And of course, it's bitterly cold. So this is the lengths that one policeman has gone to try and raise awareness for child abuse. Now, we've got a little video here. This was taken a couple of days ago by Louise Collins, and it shows John talking about his walk in his own words.
We left from Apsley, there, right? We left with the former Cabinet Minister for Policing and Crime, Mike Penninmore, with us. He's campaigning for the protection of police whistleblowers. A good man, has done a lot of work, so he came part of the way. We've completed about nearly 15 miles now.
Just today?
Yeah.
How many miles in the end was it yesterday?
In the end, it was 32 miles yesterday.
Amazing.
So everyone's a little bit sore, but we're going to push on, try and do another 30 miles, and then end in Milton Keynes.
Today, and then I've posted the route that you're going to be taking.
Yeah.
So anyone along the way, they're literally following the canal route.
Yeah.
All the way to Milton Keynes.
All the way to Milton Keynes.
Have a break at Milton Keynes tomorrow.
Yeah.
Have you got any more people you're meeting up with? Planned meeting, like BBC or anything? Because you were on 3 counties last night.
I met with a former police vice officer today who walked part of the way.
Yep.
Yeah, BBC Three Counties Radio interviewed us last night. They're going to do a follow-up interview with myself and Maggie Oliver and Mike Penning tomorrow morning. And I think there's some other police officers are meeting in Leighton Buzzard.
Brilliant.
And we hopefully in a couple of days going to end up in Birmingham, where we'll be meeting up with a group of victims and survivors.
Fantastic. Okay. I know Brenda Mumsy she's going to put a call out for all her little groups to come and support you on the way.
Yeah, I mean you can't miss me. I've got this.
Yeah, and you're just along the canal routes.
Just
and,
walking along,
yeah.
along.
And if anyone wants to know any more, just get in touch with myself.
Yeah.
And then I can give you updates on where he's going to be. I'm going to do this every day anyway. I'll just catch up with you every day to give them updates. So, okay, so I'll let you crack on.
I'll be off. I'll see you later.
Well, there we are, and I'll just add to that it's difficult for John to know exactly where he will be on at any particular time of any particular day. He has to cover about 30 miles a day to do this walk-in time. And so if you do want to meet up with him, you just have to accept that sometimes it's not going to be that easy for him to coordinate things. Thank you to Louise Collins for that video report. And what an amazing thing for John to do to raise awareness. Now let's focus in on that Three Counties radio report. This is the man, Andy Collins. And he did, I think it's, 16-minute interview with John Wedger and former police lady Maggie Oliver, and also Sir Mike Penning, former policing minister. We found this interview fascinating. There's the address for it at the top, of the link through to it if you'd like to go and hear it for yourself. I encourage you to listen to it. We'll do a little bit of analysis, but let's have a look at how it was presented. So this was the opening. Let's move on to a story we've been doing all morning. A retired detective from Hemel Hempstead is calling for better protection for police officers who expose corruption. And then he says, and this is directed really at John, you want more protection. I'm just going to say it's interesting there, Mike, that this walk, which was about whistleblowing on child abuse, has now become about corruption.
Yes.
Yes. So this was John's response. He says, I want some protection. What he was saying there is it's not he wanted more, he wants some protection because there hasn't been any protection at all. I want some protection. An ex-whistleblower came to me and said, they will serve gross misconduct papers. They will get you sacked. Second, the allegations on them will be sent to the CPS and they will go to prosecute you. And then you will probably get arrested and have your house searched. You're going to lose your job and go to prison. This is a common thread with whistleblowers. Police fear going to prison, whereas the other side have the money, patience and manpower to do what they want. So this is John really putting the cards on the table that from the time he blew the whistle about the Metropolitan Police, politicians, local authorities, charities and children's services covering up the abuse and deaths of children in London, he is attacked in a way which is truly horrifying. So the interview went on and Mr. Collins said, now we did contact the Met Police for a response, but they have yet to comment. So that's a bit unfortunate. The Met didn't produce a comment in time for this interview. The Independent Office for Police Conduct says there wasn't evidence to support the allegations and has now discontinued the investigations. So that was a pretty interesting comment. And the interviewer then moved on to speak to former police officer Maggie Oliver. This lady helped to end the Rochdale grooming scandal, but then became a whistleblower herself. She says her case is very similar to John's in many, many ways. I've trodden a similar path to John, but when I started to speak out about what I've seen, dozens of victims being failed, hundreds if not thousands of rapes, only one ever recorded officially, I didn't know where to turn. So that's all pretty clear stuff. We've got two police officers telling the same sort of story. She goes on, we promised to do our job, to be impartial. I went to every rank. I went to the Independent Police Complaints Commission, the Home Office, the Police Federation. They pulled out. I had to sell my family home. I really wish there'd been an independent body to be heard. Yesterday, The Guardian and Times were talking about Newcastle and Rotherham. It's still going on. The authorities turned a blind eye. And we'll end on this one. We must be brave and speak out if senior officers are failing in their duties. We need a whistleblower's ombudsman. So this is powerful stuff, and I'm going to say all credit to John and Maggie Oliver for doing what they're doing and getting this into the public domain. Even the BBC has had to take the case up now, but more on that in just a moment. But what are they talking about? They are talking about the Metropolitan Police and other police forces covering up the abuse of children. Still hasn't made mainstream BBC though, Mike. So bring on Mr. Collins. Where did he go then? Well, he came in with this. We did speak to Mike Penning earlier, who says there's a law to protect whistleblowers. And this was Mr. Penning's response. It is not for me to say what John is saying is right, but when people have the courage to stand up and say something is wrong in the police or any other public area, people need to stand alongside them. It's quite right that whistleblowers get this support. When people stand up to be counted, it's right that people stand alongside them. They pour a bucket on them. People need to feel police seniors are not organising things against you. I was proud to be with John. I think they need to reopen the investigation. Now, this is the former policing minister speaking out. He has supported John on the walk. And what is he saying? He says they need to reopen the investigation. And he goes on. He says, I handed the whole file, this is the file about child abuse and including John Wedge's evidence, I handed the whole file to the Home Office and it vanished. There are some strange things happening here. There are other officers saying identical things. The minute they come forward, they accuse people of a breach of data. That's the police accusing these people of a breach of data. For the police, this has a prison sentence attached to it. If you're a police officer and you're caught doing something improper with people's data, you can go to prison. And the law is that we need to make sure, the law is there to protect whistleblowers. We need to make sure it's enforced. Their jobs need to be protected. So pretty explicit stuff. He says the Home Office lost the report. But the interviewer doesn't pick up on that at all, Mike. It's just drifts across the screen. In comes Mr. Collins again. Whistleblowers are important. Earlier, who says there is a law to protect whistleblowers? So he's admitting that it's been acknowledged that whistleblowers need to be protected, but the key things he doesn't pick up on. He doesn't pick up on the fact that the Metropolitan Police are allowed to get away with no comment. He doesn't pick up on the fact that the Home Office has lost yet more documents relating to child abuse. Now, one of the organisations mentioned in that report was this one. It's the Independent Office for Police Conduct. And I thought people would just be interested to see a little bit more about it. So the Director General here was the Chief Executive of the London Borough of Harrow. And I found this very interesting because, of course, all of John Wedge's testimony is to the failure of local authorities within London. And one could say, how independent are these people if the main man has got a background in some of those very communities? I don't get a comfortable feeling.
No.
So let's see where we go next. Well, we can bring in this lady, Manjeet Gill. She has worked in chief executive, chair and non-executive roles across local government, national charity boards and mental health trusts. She's worked with the NHS. And then again, we find here that she's working with local authorities, interim chief executive at Wokingham Borough Council and a policy spokesperson with Solace, which is the organisation linking local authority chief executives together. So I don't get a feeling of independence here at all. But let's bring in Bill Matthews, and it gets interesting. He began his career as an engineer, Motorola, Bill currently chairs a public-private sector company that develops infrastructure for the NHS. He also chairs the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission, and the BBC Pensions Trust. So I wonder whether that has any influence at all on how the BBC would report that this organisation said that they didn't find anything really of value in what was going on. John Wedger made a report, but they didn't really think there was a problem. And we've got this man here, the Director General of Operations, Mr. Todd, and he was formerly working for the Cabinet Office on some £500 billion worth of projects. So I'm going to say I think this is a government man.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's ask the question, where is the missing Wedger file? It was put into the Home Office. This is another child abuse file which seems to have just disappeared. Quite remarkable. So if any of our audience think that they would like to contact the Home Office to ask what's happened with that file, obviously very polite, reasonable letters and emails would be very powerful to pin down where this file has actually gone to. Now, compare John Wedger's report with what the BBC can do on this one. I take 200 selfies a day. This produced a major article by the BBC on this young man, and he's obsessed with taking selfies, or he was. I think he's taken about 50,000 of himself. And the BBC says a recent study suggested an obsession with selfies is a genuine condition called selfitis. Is this real, Mike?
No.
No, this is fake news. An urge to take selfies and upload them on social media more than 6 times a day is chronic selfitis, according to researchers at the University of Nottingham and the School of Management in India. So this is another picture of this young man. I think he's got a few issues. But we now bring in an independent charity, the Royal Society for Public Health. They're calling on the government and social media platforms to introduce pop-up warnings on your phone after you spent 2 hours online, just to protect your health, because you're not bright enough to protect your own health. So these people are going to do it for you. They say this: 7 out of 10 teenagers told us they receive support from social media in challenging times. That's what the chief executive, Shirley Kramer, said. And this was the best bit for me. But we also know that depression and anxiety are fueled by social media. So here's the BBC helping fuel the social media, Mike, and they're well aware that this is going to cause depression and anxiety. If you don't know what the Royal Society for Public Health is, you need to, because this is another agency setting government policy. Don't worry though, it's independent. It's an independent health education charity, the world's longest established public health body. Our vision is that everyone should have the opportunity to optimise their health and well-being. And of course, it's working on policy, not just in UK. No, they're going to change the whole world, which is good for all of us, or maybe not. And if you want to know who's behind them, an amazing list. We've got ITM Productions, we've got Alcohol Health Alliance, we've got the Local Government Association, Public Health England, Wigan Council, and the UK Health Forum, and more. So this is participatory democracy, Mike. We're not having voters giving their opinions, and that forms policy. It's these, quote, independent charities. And I'll go from there to this before I end this section. We've got the Evening Standard reporting that rapes in London have soared by 20% amid warnings over a possible rise in sex attacks in the capital.
Right.
Now, the twist in this is that the police don't really know whether there's more actual rapes occurring or whether women are becoming braver at coming forward to report them.
Or perhaps they're just recording more.
Or perhaps they're just recording more. So police recorded 7,613 rapes in the 12 months to the end of January, compared with 6,392. But we're confused. We don't really understand what's happening. And here's Craig Mackey, the Deputy Commissioner for the Met Police. He was asked, do you know what was behind the rise? He says, no, is the honest answer. It's not as simple as saying this is increased confidence. Of course, that plays a part, but there is something going on with sexual offending in London that we don't fully understand the causes of it. We see the end of it, but we don't understand the causes. So this is the same Met Police that harassed, bullied, threatened John Wedger and other policemen for coming forward to talk about the Met Police covering up the rape and abuse of youngsters, including children. But when the statistics, the rape is on the rise, comes to the fore, they're very confused, Mike. They can't really understand it.
Okay, we're gonna follow this thread really, because the government has announced the Trusted Relationships Fund. This was yesterday. They announced the £13 million fund to help youth workers, police, nurses, and other professionals form close, protective relationships with children and young people at risk of sexual exploitation. Does that give you a sense of confidence, Brian?
I've got to say no.
No. Because as soon as you get this type of situation, of course, that attracts people that are that way inclined. So we haven't seen the past. We haven't seen a reputation built up amongst these organisations to guarantee the safety of the young people involved. Young people at risk of sexual exploitation, county lines gang crime or relationship abuse, the Trusted Relationships Foundation will invite local authorities to apply for funding to run projects aimed at fostering relationship between frontline staff and at-risk children. This is just a paedophile sweetie shop really here that they're building. Through the fund, local authorities are encouraged to work with local partners to improve the way professionals, including social workers, youth workers, police and voluntary sector practitioners, work together to support vulnerable young people. And they're going to establish a safe space where young people can share their concerns with professionals who will listen to them. They're going to provide special counselling services. They're going to deliver positive activities, including sport, music, arts and volunteering. Is that the reward for the children if they cooperate? I'm not sure. Improving the way local organisations work together to support the most vulnerable young people. So that's breaking down the silos. Working with children who repeatedly go missing to ensure that they're kept safe and well. Well, of course, one of the reasons that children repeatedly go missing is because they're stressed for some reason or other. And quite often that's because they're being abused. But anyway, this includes a review which is going to be carried out by this organisation, the Early Intervention Foundation, and commissioned by the Home Office.
Sorry, Mike, is that the same Home Office that has lost the Wedger child abuse file?
It seems to be the same Home Office, yes.
That's a bit unfortunate.
Yes, so this is coming out of this review, and the review found that a trusted relationship with an adult is an essential part of programmes to support vulnerable children, and that the lack of trusted relationships is consistently cited as in reviews of failures around child sexual abuse and exploitation. So the question is, who is this Early Intervention Foundation? It's both a registered charity and also one of the government's What Works centres. And they say that they evaluate the evidence of what works and what does not work in the areas of early intervention, both programs and innovative local practice. It was set up in 2013, I'm sorry, but we find the usual suspects right at the heart of it. So here we are, a tweet that they pushed out not so long ago, that they're supported by Capita One. Now, Capita One seems to be a cartel with Capita at the centre. And if we look at some of the other organisations that are involved with this, we've got all the usual suspects. Experian. I mean, this is all corporate interests. iDocs, Experian, Progress. You know, it's all the usual crowd. IEF themselves, supported by Garfield Weston Foundation, the Barrow Cadbury Trust, Capita One, Royal Bank of Scotland, Department for Education, Department for Work and Pensions, Department of Health, Department of Communities and Local Government, the Home Office, Public Health England, Cabinet Office, Social Mobility and Child Poverty Commission, Public Policy Institute for Wales. So this is a cartel of some kind. Now here is the, the question here, Brian, is what are we dealing with? We see the government calling for closer integration between third sector organisations, corporate organisations, and government, and this seems to be the epitome of that, because we have an organisation supported by the various foundations, the various government departments, and Capital One, which seems to be a cartel of a bunch of different corporate interests. It's just a hugely dangerous direction we're travelling in at the moment.
The charities given, or so-called independent charities, non-government organisations, given immense power in forming policy, which the government then use. But you dig inside the charity or the NGO, and as you say, you're finding these corporate powerhouses. So really, it's the corporations that are now pushing policy into the government by the back door, and they seem to have an unnatural fascination with children. While you're reading that out, I just couldn't help resist. Look at Joe Caseborn, Chief Executive of the Early Intervention Foundation. Yeah. Previously, Joe served as Director of Development at the Institute for Government, leading the Institute's work on public services and English devolution. So this is a highly political woman in her past, and the agenda is breaking down the existing constitutional structure. I think this is something very insidious.
Okay, so we move on to this Voices from Syria 2018 report. This is women in Syria are being sexually exploited by men delivering aid for the United Nations and international charities, despite warnings to bosses 3 years ago. So this appeared in the Daily Mail and in the BBC. Well, what was fascinating to me, Brian, was that, of course, this is not a new report. The BBC and the Mail's articles implying that there's something new here that's come out following the exposure of Oxfam. But in fact, this report was originally published in 2015, and the latest version of it published in November 2017. So here's the BBC's coverage of this. Syria conflict, women sexually exploited in return for aid. The lady there told the BBC they were withholding aid that had been delivered and then using these women for sex. Some had experienced it themselves, some were very distraught. I remember one woman crying in a room, and she was very upset about what she'd experienced. Women and girls need to be protected when they're trying to receive food and soap and basic items to live. And so it went on. Now, my question then was, what is driving this aid, sexual exploitation as a result of aid workers agenda? Because if this report has been known about for several years, which it has, then why is it suddenly coming to the fore right now at this time? This is the question. Well, maybe we get a clue. Because Tracy Crouch, here she is, has announced a public call for evidence on a new strategy that will harness the power of communities, charities and businesses to help build a fairer society. The consultation closes on the 22nd of May, and she says, from supporting the most vulnerable and disadvantaged people in society to the work of charities, community groups and businesses helping good causes, civil society is a part of the fabric of our society. We want to have an open conversation about civil society, what is working well, what government can do to strengthen it further. If you want to help create a stronger civil society, we want you to share your ideas on how government can work with and support civil society to support people, including young people, to play an active role in building a stronger society, to unlock the full potential of the private and public sector to support social good, to help improve communities and make them better places to live and work in, and to build stronger public services. This is all about building a fairer society. And Brian, if we look at what you've just been talking from the John Wedger section on through the news programme, if we look at what we've been covering with regard to the EIF and also this report on more sexual abuse through the aid sector, and what we seem to be seeing here is a two-pronged attack. The government carrot and stick thing going on, promoting civil society as hard as they possibly can, while at the same time, all the abusive activities that have been going on over the years that have been held under under the radar, kept under the carpet. Suddenly those are coming out in the mainstream media, and the government seems to be putting pressure on civil society to behave in a particular way. Am I reading too much into this?
Well, I think it's a good analysis, Mike, because of course the charity and the NGO sector, this was the base on which Cameron in particular said he was going to build big society. The government doesn't want independent charities or independent NGOs who are going to come up with policy different to the government's policy. They want simple clones who are going to reinforce it. So I think the abuse of vulnerable people has been encouraged to happen in some of these big organisations for this very moment when suddenly the government could turn the screws on them to make sure they toe the line. And of course, most of the big international charities are not funded by collection buckets in the community. They are funded from government multi-million pound bungs. So this is about control of the charities. But isn't it remarkable we can comment on the vulnerable people in Syria, but what we can't do, particularly the BBC, is any proper investigation into what's happening to the vulnerable people in this country. So, yeah.
And as I say, Tracy Crouch there wanting to build a fair society. This is a term which is increasingly being used by government ministers and the Prime Minister. If you want to understand it, we have an article, an explainer, on the UK Column website. It's entitled In Pursuit of Fairness by Martin Edwards, published a couple of years ago, but still absolutely valid. Please go and have a read at that. Now let's move on to international stuff quickly. And Jonathan Allen, who is the new at least the recently appointed permanent representative to the UN, he's no longer deputy, has called for Security Council members to vote yesterday on a resolution on Yemen. So he gave a statement. He said that the Security Council has long recognised the situation in Yemen and that it threatens international peace and security. He said the United Kingdom is deeply concerned that Iran has failed to take the necessary measures to prevent the direct or indirect supply, sale or transfer of short-range ballistic missiles, missile propellant and unmanned aerial vehicles to the then Houthi Sula alliance, as reported by the panel of experts. We agree with the panel's assessment that in light of this, Iran is in non-compliance with paragraph 14 of Resolution 2216. Iran and other states who violate the Security Council resolutions must be held accountable for this. Now, this is coming from the British permanent representative to the UN from the country that is arming the Saudi coalition, that's dropping the majority of the arms and munitions on the civilians in Yemen. But we don't need to worry about civilians in Yemen. They're not really of concern to the press or media in this country, Brian. It's only civilians in East Ghouta and Idlib where the terrorists are there, and the civilians there that we need to worry about. We don't need to worry about civilians that were in Mosul either. So it's only when there's a policy agenda at work here that we need to worry about civilians, apparently. But anyway, Russia vetoed this resolution put forward by the UK yesterday over pressuring Iran over Yemen. They strongly support, the text was strongly supported by the United States. It got 11 votes in total, but the Russians vetoed it. China and Kazakhstan abstained. Bolivia also vetoed it. And after the veto, the UNSC adopted a Russian drafted measure instead, which was pretty similar to the British one, except it didn't mention Iran. And in the meantime today, Boris Johnson was on the Today programme on Radio 4 this morning. He said that the UK should seriously consider airstrikes in Syria if Assad was found to have used chemical weapons on civilians. So here we go again. We have been warning for several weeks now, amongst others, 21st Century Wire warning as well, Vanessa Beeley warning too, that the White Helmets were going to claim that a chemical weapons attack in Idlib or in East Ghouta. And Boris Johnson now saying, well, if there's any evidence for that, we should be bombing Syria. He said that Western countries should not allow the use of illegal weapons to go unpunished. He says it's very important to recognise there's no military solution that we in the West can now impose. I think we have to be absolutely clear about this. The people listening to us, listening to this program in Eastern Ghouta, cannot get the idea that the West is going to intervene to change the odds dramatically in their favour. But what I think we need to ask ourselves as a country, and I think we in the West need to ask ourselves, is can we allow the use of chemical weapons, the use of these illegal weapons, to go unreprieved, unchecked, unpunished? I don't think we can. So there you go.
And Mike, I'll just add to that some statistics have been coming out on how much UK has spent on dropping bombs. And the figure is that the UK spent £1.75 billion on airstrikes in Iraq and Syria since 2014. This is information that's come out through Freedom of Information requests, principally put in by Drone Wars UK. So that's $2.44 billion US of munitions dropped on Syria, and they want to drop more because they haven't been punished enough for chemical weapons for which the government's produced no proof.
Indeed. Now, I just want to end by reminding everybody of the gentleman that provides Boris Johnson with his evidence of chemical weapons use. He is wearing a white helmet, as you can see, but you know, this is the guy that Boris thanks, and no doubt we'll see the same guy in China in the not too distant future, because I hear that ISIS is on its way.
All right, okay. Well, there we have it. One of the comments in our chat box as we were going through talking about the charity and non-government organisation sectors, how they are being controlled, the screws are coming down by the government over the subject of rapes and abuse, but they are part of the government policy framework. Somebody said, this does your head in, it's all upside down, lies are being put forward as truth. To which I would say, exactly, this is the policy. Everything now is turned on its head. So values, morality, common sense, those are all out. In has come politicised newspeak, and the aim is for everything that we've traditionally known to be turned on its head. This is why Conservative MPs, candidates like Danny Kruger and Nick Bowles, said publicly a couple of years ago that the Tories plan to introduce a period of what they called creative destruction. In order to change society into the new model, everything had to be destroyed. We would say that's absolutely what's taking place. So there we are. Thank you to all the UK Column supporters and donators. If you're not already a subscriber, please subscribe to help us do what we do. And of course, thank you to all the people who send us in news snippets and links, because very often those are key pieces of information we may have missed ourselves. So if you're researching and you find things of interest, please continue to pass those through. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.